Mr. Jesse Walker, direct from Louisville, Kentucky. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, not too bad. Thanks for asking. You're kind of known for having a lot of students who are over 40 and a lot of students who are female. So, what's the secret to your success? How did you attract that demographic? And is it just a self-perpetuating thing where once you get a critical mass and some momentum, that it just starts building on itself and goes from there?
So there is definitely an aspect of it that is that critical mass piece that you talked about, but you really do have to be careful kind of being continuously protective of this culture that you built because it can go off the rails pretty quickly. I our mission as a school was always to try to serve the people that needed us the most or were underserved. And we did try to always live up to the generic brochure, the BJJ brochure of jujitsu's for everybody, right? And the more time you're around, you start to figure out that that's not exactly true. But I think that's because of choices we've made. And
When
so
you
I
say
tried.
choices we've made, who's we?
Well, I think as a community, just kind of on average, I mean, we clearly have a gender problem in the sport, in the activity, whatever we wanna call it, right? It is predominantly and overwhelmingly a, male practice sport, and generally, you don't see a ton of grapplers over 40, either sticking with it or getting started from there. So, I tried to make some different choices and see kinda if it would bear fruit, and it ended up doing exactly that.
What are the specific choices that you made?
Yeah, so the first one, let's get the female population out of the way first. There's some real simple stuff, and then there's some kind of trickier stuff that we kinda have to navigate. The first one, and, it's gonna sound silly coming out of my mouth, but we have a big problem in the jujitsu community about this particular thing. As a coach and as a school owner, stop trying to screw your students,
Mm.
right? Your student
But
pool is
that's Brazilian heritage.
Yeah,
We're on
right?
we're honoring our Brazilian heritage by
I
doing that.
know, I know. Our student pool is not our dating pool. And that's not to say, and, we can talk more about that when in some of the tough calls I've had to make over the years, that relationships won't blossom and that's not okay. What I'm talking about is kind of a systematic, abusive relationship, inappropriate relationship with female students at your school.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit
Yeah.
because it sounds like you're acknowledging that sort of, I don't wanna say meaningful or serious relationships, but seriously or meaningful attempts at relationships can come out of a school.
For sure.
It sounds like you're differentiating between that and then the almost stereotypical, uh, school owner sleeping with every attractive new single female student who comes through the doors.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about,
Okay.
right? We just have to stop that. If you are serious about getting a female population in your school that is representative of that of the outside world, they have to be treated differently. They have to be treated like a student and like an athlete that's no different than their male counterparts. But the second half of that, and it's actually probably a little bit more complicated, you need to set a culture where your male students are also not treating that student body like the dating pool. Because if it really just takes one bad apple in there to start dating 2, 3, 4, however many girls you've got training, and that starts chasing other potential students away and makes the students you have leave. They're there to train. They're there to get better at this cool activity that we do. If they know that they're going in there and it feels like a meat market, they're not going to stay. And, that's a hard thing to enforce.
How do you enforce that? Do you give up like, you're allowed to date 1, maybe 2 students, and then that's it?
Yeah, we've got a quota system, right?
Yeah.
No, a lot of it's just kinda gut feel. If 2 people have been training for years and a relationship blossoms, nothing will get said about it. I might be bummed as a business owner knowing that if that relationship does end, I may end up losing a student out of it, but if I find out that something different, something other than that is going on, we've handled it a number of different ways over the years, whether that's talking to our female students that are involved in whatever kind of situation, letting them know that, if there's multiple women involved or, whatever else may be going on, we try to make sure everybody's informed about exactly what's going on. We really don't like being in the middle of any of it to begin with, but we have been in situations where one person doesn't know that the other, and it starts getting real chaotic really quickly. And like I was saying earlier, that can really take a culture off the rails.
Mm.
I don't know that we have had anyone that I've had to throw out of the school for this reason, but we have certainly had, a handful is probably even a strong word, but, two or three over the years that have decided to change schools or quit jujitsu rather than changing their behavior here. And, that's a decision they make, and that's fine. But it is much more important to me to keep the women that we have than to let one other, athlete that we have run through the entire student body. That's not appropriate to us.
Even getting away from the women and the dating within the school
Yeah.
discussion, I think too many school owners are much too concerned about keeping that one student when that one student effectively drives away 5 students, whether
Yeah.
it's terrible. I mean, I've seen it with terrible hygiene,
Yeah.
as opposed to cracking down on that one guy with a stinky gi or maybe telling him, "Man, you stink. You have to wash your gi after every class."
Yeah.
You've lost. I from the floor, it's pretty obvious. Oh, this person quit, this person complained, and then we don't see him again. This person, complained after rolling with that guy, and we don't see him again. But the school owner is too concerned about that one person, or we take it up a level, the guy who hurts people, the
Uh-huh.
guy who's always, creating massive drama. I think to save the bulkier students, get rid of that one bad apple.
You
I
got to
think
get
that's
rid of
not
them.
done enough.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think that also leads into the discussion of the older grapplers, right?
Mhm.
So we do our best to meet people where they are, whatever kind of shape they're in, whatever kind of attributes we're dealing with when they come in. That's where we try to meet them. I feel like historically, in a lot of the schools I visited over the years, although there are a lot that aren't like this, you're expected to, keep grinding until you can catch up with the whatever level is in the room. And if you don't survive that meat grinder, you're just getting spit out the back door. And that's a terrible business model. And it ends up just creating a gym where you're just making tough guys tougher. And I don't think that that's supposed to be our goal as coaches, right? So that goes into everything, including, how we roll early on, who we have to partner up with folks, difficult conversations about people going too rough. I was talking to someone the other day about this. I don't hand out a blue belt until I know that you can safely and productively roll with every single person in that room safely, right? That's more important to me than anything else. If you are a safe training partner, you are well on your way to blue belt. That needs to be your number one focus when you come in.
Well, let's get granular. How do you encourage your students to roll, and what everything's in the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
What kind of rules are you setting? I mean, there's like culture, but then there are also rules and there's also enforcement of rules. Sometimes there are rules that aren't enforced, and that's terrible.
Yes.
Better not to have a rule.
Yeah.
So what specifics are you encouraging people to do?
So, a couple of things, and I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole, certainly not yet, but we do a lot of constraint based gaming where things are so constrained that even if they do go a little too hard or whatever, the chances of something catastrophic happening are minimized based on the way I'll design a particular game. But when it comes to rolling in general, our students have lovingly called it the California roll. Most of the time in the foundations classes early on, white belt level, And I even have our higher belts do this too, but we call it the California roll, and it's not anything we invented. We've borrowed bits and pieces from folks over the years, but they're when they roll, no explosive movements, no using strength to solve problems, don't park anywhere for too long. And if you're having to grunt your way through a submission, you don't have it, let it go and find something else. And that really allows people to do a few things. They get to take chances and experiment without the threat of getting injured. It allows people to really, even the really athletic people, to start becoming less reliant on that, and so that they can work on their actual grappling skills. And it allows, older, injured, mismatched size, all of those kind of weird things that make it hard to roll at 100%. It allows them to roll together and to train together safely. And what I've discovered is their level actually increases at a faster pace than when you just cut the room loose and let them go crazy.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think the improvement's faster?
I think a couple of reasons. I think that people embrace and get more comfortable with failure, and that's something we talk a lot about. If you are not the kind of person that has a high tolerance for failure, this is probably not the hobby for you, right? And I think this gives people this opportunity to fail and to kind of embrace that without the threat of, well, if I fail, I might get my arm ripped off or I might get my neck twisted or this, that, the other thing. And in failure, that's generally where that learning zone is. If you're doing everything right and executing perfectly, you're just performing, right? And this allows them to really stay in that learning zone. And I also think that, like I said earlier, it really does allow people to focus on the jujitsu rather than the attributes that I'm just making my jujitsu work with. And that tends to spool people up a lot more quickly.
I love the term California roll. I've never heard that before. So
So the background with that is I think the first day I described it to people, I'm like, imagine that you've been surfing all day and you're coming off the beach, you just smoked a joint, you're in here, you're chill, you just want a chill roll, and they're like, "Oh, you mean like a California roll?" I'm like, "Exactly that." And so that's how it got its name.
that's I think that might stick. Like, it seems that when people are rolling that way, call it flow rolling, California roll. I've heard it described, like roll like a baby.
Mhm.
Everyone's chill up until they get close to a submission.
Yeah.
We're rolling, you catch me in an armbar, and I'm like, motherfucker, you're not getting my arm, and now I'm using strength to hold it, and now you get your panties in a knot, and I'm going to use strength to finish it. It seems like that's the place where this often breaks down, is right on the
Yeah.
cusp of a submission.
Yeah. 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 Because and I use the term failure, but I also think the word losing is appropriate. We tried very hard early on to get this concept of losing out of people's brains.
Mm.
Unless they are actively competing, they don't need to be worried about losing. They don't need to be worried about failing. That is that is what they need to be in here doing in order to learn. But one of the fun little tricks that we have started to use is if you are with a partner that is all of a sudden no longer giving you the California roll, we have their training partners stop and tell them what state they think they're in. So you tell them, this kind of feels like an Oklahoma roll to me.
Oh,
Cause this is, we're getting pretty far away from California now.
what's the maximum intensity roll that you can get? Like Kazakhstan roll?
Yeah, all the way on the other side. So, we keep it light and we keep it playful so that, even if people do get, especially at the end of submissions and things like that. But again, if you can keep kind of hammering into people like, hey, yeah, you're at the end stage of an armbar. You know what you should be doing is trying to figure out a non-strength based way out of that armbar. And if you get caught, you get caught. Go back and let that arm get caught again and see if you can get out of it next time. Fail, 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 and that will start happening less and less and less.
How do you handle stand up and takedowns? Because I think that's universally acknowledged as the area of highest danger in terms of injuries per unit of training time.
Yeah. So we train stand up pretty frequently. A lot of it until they get further down the road is real constraint based. I may start with them already having a leg up and just trying to work on getting their partner down, hips on the ground. And so they're getting used to falling. And I tell people when we're doing that kind of stuff, if you're feeling like you're pretty off balance, don't fight it. Don't try to catch yourself. Just sit down, depending on kind of whichever activity we're working on. And if it is, people that have worked on this a lot and have a lot of experience and they understand the intensity that they need to go at to get this stuff done. I'll cut them loose a little bit, but early on, it's very constrained. We're still working and we're still doing all the things, and people are falling and people are doing takedowns. But I think keeping them in that sandbox and kind of parsing it out in different scenarios early on has been really successful for us.
So you mentioned it sounds like finishing a single leg. You and I are training. You've got me in a single leg, and I'm trying to hop around and stabilize, and you're trying to put my ass on the ground. What are some other examples of sort of games or very heavily constrained training scenarios to train takedowns fairly safely?
Yeah. So
I assume grip fighting would be one of them.
yeah. So we a lot of stand up neck wrestling, hand fighting, that sort of stuff. So a lot of people early on, I try to funnel them in the stand-up game around to the back. So we're working arm drags and head clears and whatever they can to get to the back. So that may just be a game. We're going to start face to face, no connections, and the game ends when one of you gets a rear body lock, right? And then we can start from, all right, now we're going to start at the rear body lock.
Right.
If you can break free from the rear body lock, game over.
If you can
If
suplex the guy backwards onto his head at full
yeah,
power, then
then you got it.
you win.
And so that's actually something that we constrain in most of these games is no elevation based takedowns, because that ends up taking a lot of the unsafe stuff out of the equation.
What do you
And then
mean
what's
elevate? Obviously, a suplex is an
yes,
elevation-based takedown.
suplex stuff or just literally just trying to pick people up and dump them.
Mm.
Again, that's real strength based. There's not a ton of technique there, especially when there's a big size discrepancy. So, we're working on a lot of trips, singles, doubles, a lot of stuff that stays pretty attached to the ground. And, we will work some elevation stuff, but again, it's very constrained so that everybody knows which way we're falling and what's happening and
Mm.
that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that in terms of starting on the feet, there's the what you were calling elevation-based takedowns. If I go in for a double leg, pick the guy up and slam him on his head, I mean, you're actually trying to finish him off by hitting him with the earth, right? I mean, this is an
Correct.
MMA strategy. I've seen it done in amateur submission grappling tournaments, and now people are not paying their $50 to get suplexed onto their head. But now they run into some guy who's got dreams of fighting in the UFC. Or in one case, I saw a tournament where a UFC fighter had entered the tournament and was busy slamming recreational players on their head in a
Lovely.
tournament with a rule set explicitly said no slamming people on their head. Certainly that guard pulling, especially pulling close guard,
Yep.
can result in catastrophic stuff. Unfortunately, Kani Basami, flying scissors, beautiful
Mhm.
takedown,
Yeah.
amazing takedown,
Yeah.
such a high injury rate. What are the other kind of high injury rate scenarios that you've seen standing or on the ground?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to be real careful with, you know, working any sort of takedowns where there's a lot of weird leg entanglements. I've got one that I do, which is kind of starts off as an Uchimata, and then my foot goes over for a far side leg trip, and you kind of have to be careful with the angles and getting, especially on that far side leg, making sure that your foot placement and stuff is okay.
Where you're stepping
Anytime you're kind of
behind the
going,
guy's support foot?
yes.
Yeah.
And if people are struggling with that, it'll be, that Uchimata start and then just sweep down to an ankle pick instead. So, if people are struggling with it, we usually try to figure out some way to achieve mostly the same thing in a safer way. But yeah, I mean, any of the stuff that causes a reaction for people to reach down, which is usually the elevation stuff, or anything that kind of goes lateral into the knee, you have to be real careful about. And then, the other thing, and I may have originally gotten this idea from Chris Payne's. I'd known it was a problem for a long time, but we've kind of just banned it at the school altogether. Is head outside double legs, right? Because people just have a tendency to wrap around that neck and fall back.
Oh, so not a head outside single leg, that's banned in the
Or either
IBJJF,
one, either one.
right?
Yeah, the head outside stuff, we just kinda we cut it just because it can it work? Does it work? Like, sure. Is it worth the risk? Like, not for the 42-year-old guy that needs to go to work tomorrow. Like, it's okay for us to just cut that out of our game here. If they wanna compete, we can have a different discussion about it.
So what is your standard double? We're really getting into the weeds here, but hey,
Yeah, yeah.
what is the standard double leg finish that you would consider safer than the head outside driving with the ear?
So, with the double, we're usually forehead into the chest.
Okay.
Or, we're into the solar
Yeah.
plexus.
A blast
It's
double
kind of a
type of thing.
blast double. Yeah, 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 yeah. Which again can also, you have to be careful with it because if you don't have a strong neck.
Yeah. I don't like it. I don't like
I
that shock.
yeah, I don't we don't do them that often. We're usually mostly working singles, and there will be certain situations where your head ends up outside that, I'll do corner cut, doubles and stuff like that. But in general, we just try to keep our head not in that neck grabbable area.
Yeah. I mean, I think wrestling would change a lot if you had just freestyle wrestling, but you allowed one submission, and that's the guillotine choke.
Absolutely.
That would be a fascinating sport to watch. It's
Yeah.
exactly the same as wrestling,
Just
but you're
that
allowed
one
to.
thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
It,
Yeah, that would be great to watch. That would be great to watch.
uh, of course, I mean, you are dealing with 20-year-old athletes with necks that are twice as wide as their heads. But
Yeah, there's that.
so I don't know how to say this, but you seem to be advocating for a fairly touchy-feely approach to jiu-jitsu, a kinder, gentler jiu-jitsu, and that's really not the image that Kentucky, where you're located, has. So how does your jiu-jitsu, and that's just an assumption on my part. I've never been to Kentucky. I'd love
Yeah,
to go someday.
yeah.
Uh, but how does your school's attitude fit into the larger Kentucky jiu-jitsu scene?
We probably stand out like a sore thumb, I would
Mhm.
say, which, in my view, in my opinion, it's a competitive advantage. But in some ways, it makes our mission harder because, if they visited other schools or, gone to places that have done things differently, they may assume that all schools are that way. But, we're fine with that. We are okay being that different. It's been our mission from the get-go to be jujitsu for everybody else, right? The people that are underserved and don't have a place to train. And, competitively, we still end up on the podium, when folks do compete. So I'm perfectly comfortable that our approach is still cranking out tough grapplers.
Okay. When people say jiu-jitsu is for everyone, I think that's a different thing from saying everyone can get a black belt. Do you see daylight between those two things?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So our approach, put more succinctly and more specifically, we try to be the school for anybody, but we know that we are not going to be the right school for everybody.
Right.
And we treat jujitsu the same way. Jujitsu can be for anybody, but it's not going to be for everybody. And that's okay. Right. I was having a conversation with another coach a few days ago. You know, there are certain affordances that you may have to make, particular grapplers, older grapplers, female grapplers. We've adjusted our culture to be an environment that they can thrive in, where other environments they may not thrive in. We as school owners have to make a decision about whether or not we're willing to make those affordances, right? I've had students that have left because they didn't like the bruising, right? They didn't like being bruised. And it's like, well, could I somehow conjure up a bruise-free jujitsu? Like, I don't know. It'll probably be a lot like Aikido, but like maybe, but I wasn't willing to do that. I was like, well, this is part of the sport.
Here's your bubble wrap. We
Right. But as a school owner and as a coach, you have to make a decision about where you're going to draw that line. If you really want to create a super tough room full of killers, you are probably not going to have a lot of female grapplers. You're probably not going to have a lot of older grapplers. You may have a couple, but they're not going to be your bread and butter. It's a business decision, I guess. It just seems like a lot of us are making the same decision. So I have been trying really hard to make different decisions.
Yeah. So you're zigging when everyone else is zagging. I've seen the book, and I've had friends who've read the book. I've never read the book, Blue Ocean Strategy.
Oh, I haven't heard of it.
This is the ultimate headline reading, like, the title reading and then reading the little word on the back. I think the basic idea is, as opposed to going to compete with against everybody, if everybody's trying to do one thing, then you try and find the thing that nobody's competing in. So you're
A
getting
different fishing hole.
100% of a smaller student base. You're getting, let's say that 80% of people that want to do jiu-jitsu in Kentucky are 20 to 30-year-old wannabe MMA fighters. That's being spread out between all the other schools, and you're getting close to 100% of the remaining 20%. So that's a pretty big number.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
So
that's been our approach for sure.
mm. So what is your personal jiu-jitsu background then?
Ooh, I have a weird background.
Good.
So my martial arts journey for about a year started in Filipino martial arts, but I had actually wanted to start in Krav Maga because I was really interested in self defense and that always seemed like a cool, real tough, martial art. I moved down to Atlanta in 2005, 2006. Where I was didn't have any Krav Maga, and they did in Atlanta. So I was at the gym. Like I moved in on a Saturday, and by Monday I was at the Krav Maga gym, and I got kind of addicted to that. The way some people talk about getting addicted to jujitsu. I was there every day, all day. After work, just constantly. I was fortunate enough to get exposed to some rather off the beaten path Krav Maga instructors who really weren't Krav Maga instructors. They were really more, MMA instructors who were able to take MMA training methodologies and apply kind of priorities and principles of self defense instead of winning in an octagon. In that, I got exposed to, you know, a lot of grappling, a lot of stand-up neck wrestling, Greco stuff, some freestyle collegiate wrestling, and a lot of jujitsu.
Mm.
And being exposed to this, I was very much in neck deep in the Krav Maga world, and I'm like, I wanna get my black belt. I wanna, make my way through the progression. But as soon as I get that black belt, it's jujitsu time. It's Miller time, baby. So I did. I ended up getting my black belt and, after, a few weird health scares and stuff, it took a little longer. But once I got my black belt, I knew that was the next thing. I was running a school at the time, so I didn't have time.
So you got your Krav Maga black belt.
I got my Krav Maga black belt,
Okay.
yes. And I was running a school down in Atlanta. For those of you that have run schools, it's not terribly easy. It's really hard to find your own training time when you're running a school, especially when the training time is like, hey, I need to learn this new thing. So I wasn't able to go to you know whatever jujitsu of Atlanta. I didn't. I was every night I was teaching, so a lot of it ended up being I'd go, once a month, once every 2 months, I'd go to, Charlotte, where at the school I got my Krav Maga black belt, and I would train jujitsu there, and then, during the week, I would have it, and I would start teaching it, and I would start training it and, working on it on my own. And as a lot of coaches learn over the years, one of the quickest ways for you to learn something is to try to teach it. And so, I'm sure I had a lot of fumbles and foibles while I was doing it, but I made my way through. And, eventually I was about a 8 to 10 year white belt, right? Because I didn't actually have a coach. I just was slogging along, and eventually I found a black belt in Miami who was willing to kinda mentor me and take care of my promotions. I would see him a few times a year, and I was working,
Mm.
on my own all the other times, and, you know, I ended up getting my black belt, when was it? A little over a year ago through, mostly being self-taught.
Yeah. This is becoming a more common arc. I'm going to be releasing a podcast I did with my friend Paul Kinzia, who's pretty close to Atlanta, who basically he likes to refer to himself as a homeschooled black belt, right? He did go do most of his training by himself, studied a ton of tape, studied a ton of instructionals,
Yeah.
would bring people in to train with one-on-one, and then fairly often go to various schools, but not go all in, basically using those schools as he'd learn something, but it'll also calibrate his skill. It sounds
Yeah,
like you were doing the
absolutely.
same thing. Once in a while,
Yes.
you'd go train jujitsu kind of for real, and
Yeah, yeah,
and you get
yeah.
to find out if this crazy mount escape system or whatever it is actually works against
Correct.
people who are very skilled. As in, you're not going off in some crazy developmental rabbit hole where you can make it work on your own students, but can't make it work against people who may be contesting you a little bit harder
Yeah,
and don't have
absolutely
that
right.
respect for you.
Absolutely right. But I get to joke around with my white belts after they've been coming for 2 or 3 months. I get to tell them, like, "Do you know that you've taken more jujitsu classes than I have?" And they're like, "What?" And I explain it to them and they understand, but they get a kick out of that.
How did you handle when you're essentially homeschooling yourself, we'll call it? How did you kind of manage the different areas, and how did you figure out what you should work on next, or did that just come organically? Like, "Holy shit, I'm getting tapped out by an armbar every day. I need to figure out armbar defense, and now I'm having problems with a passing spider guard, so now I need to work on my spider guard passing."
Yeah, I think there was some of that. I am the first to admit that, especially early on, it was pretty haphazard. It wasn't terribly well organized, and that has been a beef of mine with you know uh, traditional jujitsu coaching. Anyway, is the pathing is not terribly organized a lot of times. So honestly, if I went down to Elizabethtown to train, to go to a half guard seminar taught by Gordo. Guess what I was doing for the next 6 to 9 to 12 months? It's like I was working Gordo's half guard stuff, and I go to a Dean Lister seminar and well, now I'm working on some weird ankle lock stuff. So it was pretty haphazard until I think once I started, late in my purple belt, early into my brown belt, then I was like, I need to start organizing this and thinking through and paying attention to where I'm having struggles. And then some of it was also really student driven.
Mm.
Where are the holes in my students' games? Where are they having problems? Because that probably means that my area of expertise or I have a skill gap or a knowledge gap there that I need to work on so that I can be a better coach for my students.
Now, you do have a background in kind of cognitive science and psychology and are familiar with the science of learning.
Yeah.
So what makes you shudder the most when you watch how jujitsu is normally taught?
The thing I think that makes me shudder the most is that so much of it relies on brute force learning, almost learning
What
uh,
is brute force
in
learning?
spite learning in spite of the methodologies being
Mm.
used, right? So I I have never been a huge proponent in terms of learning. It's super fun to do, but if we're really talking about learning, especially for a lower skilled or lower level grappler, just open mat rolling is not terribly productive. We can make it productive, certainly later on, but that
What do
sort
you
of
mean later on in me as a white belt going to an open mat versus me as a purple belt going to open mat? Is that what you mean?
yeah, I mean, I think the purple belt's certainly gonna have the ability to make better use of that time, and it's gonna be
Right.
more productive for them.
Right.
I think the kind of random, here's 3 moves and, let's warm up for 20 minutes and then here's 3 random moves and let's roll for a half hour. That is not a conducive environment to learning. People, you do learn, but it ends up just kind of being by brute force. You end up seeing it so many times, or, you've gotten caught in it so many times that you finally figure out how to avoid it. But to me, it's like, and I use this kind of metaphor with my students all the time. If I'm a quarterback and I'm wanting to get better at passing the ball to a moving receiver, I don't do that by playing the entire game of football because I'm going to have to sit there and watch somebody kick field goals when I could still be over here on the side passing the ball. You get better at that skill by maybe passing the ball back and forth first, and then, maybe let the receiver start moving and then put somebody between us waving their hand, right? It's this kind of stepwise
Mm.
progression to learning. And a lot of times we don't get that kind of environment in a traditional jujitsu setting.
Yeah, it's amazing to have watched the development of the pedagogy and the training methodologies in this sport over the last, well, almost, well, 30 years.
Mhm.
I mean, initially, you know, 2 techniques and then off to the wolves. That was an improvement in training methodologies compared, I'm gonna argue, that was an improvement compared to the old days where if you were training with the Gracies in Rio in the 1960s, it'd be 1,000,000 private classes and then maybe a little bit of rolling.
Yeah.
So when people like Carlson Gracie started teaching a couple of techniques, then to everybody, didn't matter if your last name was Gracie or not, and then locking a whole bunch of tough guys straight from the beach in a room to try and tear each other's heads off. Sure, that's not a very inclusive training environment, but as a training methodology, if for producing champions, let's say producing champions is our goal, which it pretty much was Carlson
Yeah.
Gracie's goal.
Sure.
That in itself was a massive uptick or a massive improvement in training methodology. Hey, we're just gonna put a bunch of tough guys together, let them beat the crap out of each other, and we're gonna actually show them a bunch of techniques.
Yeah.
That was an improvement. I think we've then, in the 90s, even I was talking about, taking a position and just sparring a position. And the
Mhm.
goal is one person starts in turtle. Here's a revolutionary drill from the late 90s. I'm in turtle, you're on top of me, you've got the harness or the over under, and my whole goal, if I'm on top, is to get both hooks in. My goal on the bottom is to get to any other position and scrape you off my back. And that was like a light bulb moment for me. The first time I saw that drill, and then you could apply it to other things. Okay,
Yeah,
we
right.
so that basically is positional sparring,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
right.
that was back in the day, that was totally revolutionary. And now to have watched, the training methodology in some places become more sophisticated, uh, it's pretty cool to watch these ideas trickle down. Of course, everybody thinks that they have, discovered the wheel,
Yeah.
and,
I
I
have
am
not I have not discovered the wheel. I try things and I fail a lot and I iterate. I try to eat my own dog food, right? They need to see me failing as well to feel comfortable failing in the things that they're doing. And there will be some times where I'll design a game and I'll stop it right in the middle of it. I'm like, this is not working. Let's try this again and add this constraint or add this piece or add this goal. Start it again. Let's
Mm.
see if this one works.
Yeah, I think sometimes with games, there's ways to cheat the game and to win the game
Yeah.
where you're not actually developing any skill. I mean, let's
Correct.
do a takedown drill. Your goal is to take me down, and my defense is to turn around and run around the edge of the gym as fast as I can. Great.
Correct.
You've won the game and
Yeah.
learned. No,
Congratulations. Right.
no.
Um, I think a really easy one that should be easy to wrap everybody's brain around. If you designed a game where you're like, all right, both of you just start on your butts. You've got 3 minutes. You're just trying to take each other's back. Well, one of the people could just lay down on their back
Hmm,
and be like, I refuse to lose. You're not going to get
yeah.
me. And to your point, that was very much kind of like your example. How do you fix it? Well, you also make mount a thing, right? And so now they're having to fight. Oh, I can't just lay on my back or I can't just lay on my belly because now they're trying to get it at both sides. So
Mhm.
that's a simple example, but should be, should illustrate, some of the adjustments I've had to make at times.
Have you had any of your students fight MMA?
My students, no. I've had people come in and try to get me to coach them, and I do not do that anymore. When those people come in, I tell them that they have to be training regularly under me for 2 years before I will even consider getting them a fight,
Mm,
and they do not stick around.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. There was just a fatality up here in Canada.
oh, no.
Basically, it was an amateur MMA event where people they were throwing people with 6 weeks of training
Yeah.
into this event. Forget about acquiring skills, offensive and defense skills. That's not enough time to understand, have any sense of the risks. And
Or the
that's
rule set,
yeah, or the rule set.
right? It reminds me a lot of, you calls you get frequently as a school, like, "How long is it gonna take till I get good? How long until I can defend myself?" Whatever that is.
Mhm.
And, how do
What
you
do you
answer
answer?
that?
What do you okay, Jesse, how long till I get good? How long till I can kick the ass of my brother-in-law who I really don't like?
Yeah, well, so it's a very kind of individual journey. It's gonna depend a lot on the experience that you're bringing in, how frequently you're training, how safely you're training, and kind of what your end goal kind of metric is. If it's just to beat your brother-in-law up, we can probably get that done relatively quickly. But if it's to actually be a good grappler, that's one of the beautiful things I think about jujitsu is it is a long-term hobby. It can literally be an infinite hobby if you want it to be. I think that attracts and detracts certain people, which is fine. Some people like a black box.
Mhm.
I know I'm gonna be finished when
Sure.
I can check all these boxes.
I have run my 10K race and now I never need to run again, or I've done
Right.
a
I
triathlon.
I right.
Check.
Check. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Although in the sport, there's a fair number of blue belt chasers, right? I have my blue belt and then poof, I've never
That's it.
seen again.
I feel like I'm good enough. Yeah. It's interesting how that happens. And, the that I kinda had that on my list, about the female and the older grapplers, but I think this is true for everybody. Being coached to set goals appropriately in
Huge.
jujitsu is incredibly important, you know? There may be some people, a sexual assault survivor, whatever it is. There may be days that their goal is just to get in the front door
Yeah.
is a success. We did it. Yay. You got here. Some days, I'm in this category. Some days feel like a win for me when I get to leave here uninjured. But if your metrics are about who can I beat up, how many times can I tap somebody, what's the fewest number of times I can tap, that's why people sit in the parking lot after class and cry, right? It's not because they're bad at jujitsu, it's because of shitty goal setting.
Yeah. If your goal is never to tap and tap I mean,
You gotta have a bad
we've
time.
all seen the people who, when they get tapped out, they take their belt off, they hurl it across the room, they take their gi top, they throw it in the other corner, and they stomp out.
Yep.
Like, I've seen that, and guess
Yeah.
what? As those people get better, they're awful training partners. They
Correct.
because they're doing anything they can to not tap, and
Correct.
I'll make a generalization. Typically, they don't give a shit about you and hurting you because they will do anything they can to avoid that worst fate in the world, they think, which is tapping out.
That's absolutely correct. But if we can get people past that mindset, we have the opportunity, I think, to bring a lot more people under the tent.
I think you've kind of mentioned the main ways to change that mindset. I mean, modeling it yourself, setting expectations, and then actually having conversations, and then empowering the training partner to say, basically, I mean, what you were saying, the Oklahoma role versus the California role.
Right.
Hey, dude, slow down a bit, you know?
Take it easy. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that you're not tough or that, that's not a detraction from you telling that dude like, "Hey, we're not playing the game." And I tell people, especially when we're talking about the California rolls, like if you explode around somebody's guard in a California roll, like you haven't done anything. You haven't accomplished anything because you were no longer playing the game. You started playing a different game. So you still failed, even though you think you succeeded.
I wonder how much of this is just merely maximizing rolling time on the mat. And if you're 20 years old and on TRT and a dog's breakfast of other drugs, you can spend a lot of time on the mat going pretty damn hard so long as you don't have a catastrophic injury. And if you blow out your ACL and your MCL, we may never hear from you again.
Right.
So, and that's a survivor bias. We're just left with the 22-year-olds who are lucky enough not to explode their knee, who put in
Right.
enough mat time to get really good. So all these other things that you and I are doing are really to try and maximize mat time without injury.
That's it. That's the secret. That's it. I mean, and it still in some ways is that kind of brute force methodology of just spending time on the mat, but it really is important.
I just had an image of somebody trying to learn to shred the guitar. So we take some new dude and we tell him, okay, here's the basic, I don't know, chord progression where the fingers go. And if you don't play this riff in under 10 seconds, we're going to take a hammer, we're going to hit you on the hand.
Yeah.
Versus take as much time as you want and then gradually speed it up. One of those people is going to get good fast. The only person who's going to survive if you don't play this riff really fast, we're going to hit you on the hand, are the people who are insanely talented to start with.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. That's exactly it. So yeah, I mean, I think all of those things really go into it, but you're right. Ultimately, it's just maximizing mat time. And the games are part of that. It's constrained, but it's live. There's still a liveness to it that they're feeling some resistance but even then, there'll be some games where it's like, we're gonna set a designated winner. We were doing one last night where I'm getting ready. I'm getting somebody ready for competition. And I told him, I'm like, a lot of white belts get stuck under mount with as little training as you've got. That tip, that tends to happen a lot. So let's just play through that a lot. And he's like, well, you always tell me just don't let people take mount. And I'm like, well, that's true. Like that needs to be the ultimate goal, but it is going to happen. So let's work on it. But it doesn't make sense then to just start somebody in your mount and try to get out because that's not the best time to get out of mount. The best time to get out of mount is while it's happening before they settle. So I said, start in side control and set the top person as a designated winner long enough for them to get mount. I want you to feel that it's happening, realize ahead of time that it's happening, and try to brace yourself and do all the things to get yourself ready to start escaping before they settle.
mm,
Right.
essentially setting your frames to preserve some ability to move and
Exactly right.
to limit the amount of pressure that they can put on you and the amount of attachment that they can form to like just smush you into oblivion.
Exactly right. But if you start already squished and
Yeah.
everything else, you're really training a different skill at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. You're training late stage escape as opposed to
Right.
transitional or early stage escape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
That's
right.
really interesting. I've never heard of this concept of a designated winner. It even for training the essentially the designated loser of the exchange.
Yeah, and a lot of times when I do that designated winner, it's just to get them to a certain place in the game dynamically
Mhm.
rather than starting them there.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a really great way to use that tool.
Oh, wonderful. So, how do people find your school and how do people follow what you're doing?
Yeah, so, like you said, we're in Louisville, Kentucky, so if you live here or ever traveling, you always have a home here. Come train, come hang out with us. All of our socials are, at Rough Hands BJJ. I think we're just about everywhere except for X and Threads. So, yeah, come look us up. I'm always happy to talk shop. So if I said anything that piques your interest or got you upset for some reason, I guess we can chat about it.
Go grab Rough Hands, the Rough Hands handle on Blue Sky before that's gone.
Oh, yeah, it's gone. I mean, we've got it. We've
Okay.
got it. We're there.
I've gone off on more than a few rants on that platform already, so I it does seem to be a good fit. It
Agree.
yeah, reminds me of Twitter 15 years ago. I mean, people are like, "Oh, you're getting your, again, panties in a twist." Man, I was on Twitter for a long time before I, started passing major judgment on it. So I think
Yeah, it
I'm in a
was
pretty
funny.
good
I always felt like an old fuddy duddy. I never could connect with kind of the Twitter vibe, back because I started playing with it back when there were character limits and all the other, and it's like, I don't understand this. I don't get this. It's too real time for me. And there's still bits and pieces, but they all seem to be kind of headed in a general direction now, at least in terms of content formatting. And there's not a lot of differentiation except for maybe the types of people that are on certain platforms, right?
and I think honestly, like, that's a lot driven by moderation. I think
Mm,
we as a
without a doubt.
I think pretty much every time that people have tried playing with unmoderated conversation spaces, like free speech absolutism, whether that's a Facebook group or Twitter or various forums, 4chan, for example, it always goes a certain direction. It 100% of the time, unmoderated spaces that are sufficiently large go completely, well, basically full neo-Nazi. I'm not saying everyone on there is a neo-Nazi, but that's the direction that it tends to go. It's
No, but
amazingly predictable.
if we call back to an earlier part of the conversation, if you've got a gym that is just unmoderated, it's going to end up just with a bunch of male 25-year-old tough guys, right?
We're busy
Not necessarily to
fighting and then
parallel
dealing
that to
steroids out of the bathroom or
right.
in the open.
Not to parallel those guys to neo-Nazis, of course, but those environments tend to turn more hostile as time goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a decent analogy. So your job as running your gym is a content moderator
That's exactly right.
and a
Yeah.
cultural moderator. So, well,
Yeah,
thank you for
for
the work
sure.
that you do,
Well,
and,
thank you.
I I hope to visit Kentucky at some point. It's,
Yeah, we'll have
on
to
the
get
list.
you down here for sure. We'd love that.
Yeah, great. We finished the, the podcast with a pitch for, with me trying to pitch you for bringing me down there. That's not what I meant to do.
No,
Take
not at all,
photos.
not at
Kentucky is
all.
beautiful.
It's great.